Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone attending the planning meeting today, especially those in the public gallery and anyone watching the meeting via the webcast. To the members of the public in the gallery, I would like to remind you that this planning meeting is being broadcast live over the internet, so there is no need for any other filming of the meeting to take place. The meeting is available to view online now and in the future. Committee members, please be aware that we are all on camera and you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking. And please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings. I have had no request to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Please can all mobile phones and other noisy devices be put on silent. If there is an emergency alarm, please follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic Car Park. Thank you. I'll ask the officers now to introduce themselves, starting from my far right.
Good afternoon, I'm Polly Ennis, I'm from the Council's Legal Services.
I'm Rachel Beale from Democratic Services.
Good afternoon, Richard Lewis, Head of Planning.
Good afternoon, Steve Williams, Team Leader Ecology for Torfaen.
Good afternoon, Paul Wheeldon, Group Leader Highway Development, Torfaen.
Helen Smith, Planning Officer Development Management.
Norman Jones, Team Leader Applications.
Gemma Evans, Team Leader Enforcement.
Thank you very much. We go to the first item on the agenda, attendance. If you'd all sign the register in the usual way. Are there any apologies, Rachel? No apologies? No, thank you. Declarations of interest. Polly, any declarations?
Firstly, can I remind members that you need to complete the Declaration of Interest form in the Attendance Register folder if you're declaring an interest in any application. And to confirm that the following interests have been declared to me. Councillor Stuart Ashley and Councillor Faye Jones declare a personal non-prejudicial interest in agenda items 5 and 6 as members of Cumbraen Community Council, which has been consulted on the application. And additionally, Councillor Stuart Ashley also declares a personal non-prejudicial interest in agenda items 5 and 6 as a member of Torfaen Friends of the Earth who've been consulted on the application.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, which is minute of the Planning Committee held on the 17th of April. Is it a true record?
Yes.
Seconder for that? Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? No. Okay. Thank you, members. Item 4, which is a summary of planning appeal, and it's the installation of a 15-metre monopole supporting 6 number antennas, 2 number dishes, ground-based equipment cabinets and ancillary development. It was planning application 17P0618 and the site was land at junction of Church Road and Commercial Road, Tallawain, Pontypool. This is for members' information. Are there any comments, questions about it? You are willing to accept the information? Thank you. We'll go on to item 5, which is planning application number 18/P/0154, and it's erection of 219 dwellings without complying with conditions. It's on pages 25 to 50. There was a site inspection on the 4th of April. And as you know, it was on the Police Training Centre, Green Meadow Way. And Helen Smith now will give us a presentation on it. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. In 2015, full planning permission was granted for 219 dwellings on phase 1 of the allocated site of the Police Training College. This application that we're considering today is effectively an amended planning application as parts of the development wasn't carried out in accordance with the approved plans. As part of the approved scheme, there were 3 footpath links proposed onto St Giles Road for permeability reasons. This is footpath link number 1 and footpath link number 2, and there was another footpath link proposed at this location here. The applicants carried out the development and installed footpath link number 1 and 2, but prior to agreeing all the details with the planning department. As a result, footpath link number 2, there was a significant amount of hedgerow removal, more than that was necessary to create the footpath link. Residents and enforcement agreed with the applicant that the best way forward is to submit an amended planning application covering any mitigation works and the works that have been taken place. So here we have, well, as part of the development, a significant length of time has passed since the original removal of the hedge and the bank. Since then, we've been working closely with the applicant to achieve the correct and most appropriate outcome. As a result of this, extensive negotiations have been taking place between the planning department, our ecologists, and the applicant and their ecologists. And the outcome of that has been this comprehensive mitigation strategy for the whole of the hedge to improve the quality of the hedge, to replace and mitigate any that's already been lost. The hedgerow was part of the Police Training College and hasn't been managed for many years, and as a result has declined in quality over the years and has overgrown. So this plan is, sorry, it's not very clear, but this plan shows here, this is footpath link number 2, between plots 141 and 140. The extent of the hedgerow that was removed was from this location to this location here. The bank has also been removed in this location here. Some works to the inside of the bank has also taken place in this location. The blue shows the new planting, and the new planting will be a mix of hedgerow, which is shown here, trees here, and this blue area here will be a mix of understory planting and whip plantings to reinforce and to the strength of the hedgerow. There are still some more parts of the hedge to be removed, and they can be further up in the development. These can be shown as seen marked in red. This is the footpath link number 2. Footpath link number 2. As you can see, this is the extent of the hedgerow that's been taken out. This is just an illustration. Here there's the existing hedge and bank. The applicant proposes to replace the bank approximately to about 700 millimetres in this location here, and then to plant a hedgerow on top and wrapping around the fence line. Over time, this hedgerow will grow and will interact well with the adjacent hedgerows. Then here you can just see a cross-section. This is the newly created bank, and this is the fence line of these properties here. Not only is the management plan comprehensive in terms of its replacement and its replanting, it also includes a comprehensive management regime for the entire hedge. As it will be managed in an appropriate manner, this will over time also improve the strength of the existing hedge plus the mitigated planting. Here we have some photographs. This is the hedgerow. This is the western side, looking west up towards the roundabout near the community farm. Here we go, looking east from the same location, and you can just see here, this is the first footpath link. The levels aren't as great here, and the bank wasn't as significant in this location, and this was more in accordance with the approved plans in terms of the width of the opening. Going further up, you can see this is the footpath link number 1. And this is then looking back down towards the west, again, and in the distance there you can see the footpath link. This is the hedgerow here, and when you compare it with the hedgerow on the opposite side, you can see that how it hasn't been maintained and managed in the past. This is looking east up towards Uplands Terrace. Again, this is the bank here. You can see quite a substantial bank with a hedgerow planting above, and just behind there are the new dwellings. And then as you go around the corner, you can just see the footpath link number 2. So this is where the extent of the bank that was taken out. So that's the original hedge there, and this is the other side of the hedge. Here you can see the area where the bank will be replaced. You can just see a retaining wall there, which will be approximate height of the bank, and the hedgerow then will be placed and allowed to grow above it. This is looking down to the footpath, the second footpath link. You have Uplands Terrace here, and then the existing hedgerow with the development on the other side. Some parts of the existing hedgerow are poor in quality due to its lack of management, but also this area was part of the inner part of the bank was taken out as part of the unauthorised works. So this is in this sort of area and further up where there are natural gaps. That will be where the additional planting will take place to enhance it. These are the natural gaps in the hedges further up. And here you can see a substantial hedgerow which will be managed and maintained. And there's some further gaps, natural gaps which have occurred. As part of to secure the mitigation measures and make sure that they are actually carried out in accordance with the agreed details, Section 106 is proposed. The Environmental Management Plan will be subject to the Section 106 agreement, and the developers have also set out additional clauses within the Section 106 for monitoring and compliance reports to be submitted to us. The details of that can be seen on page 42 and 43 of the officer's report. Just to summarise, the main issues with this proposal was the unauthorised works that were taken place, the provision of the footpath links, extensive negotiations have taken place. One big improvement is the applicants have also agreed not to install the third footpath link, so that in its own right ensures a substantial amount of hedgerow to be further retained. There's a comprehensive mitigation package for the length of the remaining hedge, long-term management proposals, and also a method of securing certification of the mitigation in the Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Right, it's open to the floor for questions. Steve?
I'm deeply concerned because the impact is done onto the residents in St Giles Road. I mean, at the end of the day, the developer is gaining more through his negotiations, and yet the residents in St Giles are losing out.
Yes, there was a lot of disruption to residents on Uplands Terrace whilst the work was taking place, and they were in contact with us in terms of complaints. Whilst we recognise the disruption that caused the residents and their concerns, we've been able to work to get this appropriate scheme to actually put things back into place to protect them in the long term, the retention and the proper management of the hedgerow. So yes, we accepted there was disruption to the residents during the works themselves. However, we feel now that this package of mitigation, once it's implemented correctly, as the Section 106 will require them to do, then long term the residents' amenities in terms of their outlook into the hedgerow will hopefully improve because of the establishing of the reinforced hedgerow.
When they were actually doing the unauthorised work, they were told that they shouldn't be doing it, and they were total disregard to anybody approaching them to tell them that they shouldn't be doing it. So, can we believe anything that they actually putting forward?
Yes, there was a lot of disruption, and there was sometimes there were communication issues between Taylor Wimpey and ourselves and with residents. And, you know, the developers recognised that and have accepted that when it wasn't acceptable in that instance. All I can say is obviously the Section 106 agreement, these additional clauses is, you know, a much more secure way of actually enforcing them to actually carry out the works in accordance with how they should be doing it.
Okay, Steve? Yeah. Right. I've got a list. Faye, you are next. Thank you.
I would just like to ask that the people who live in Uplands Terrace have got now the back of the houses right close to them and the hedge is gone in many places. Will that hedge look the same as it did before? And with the clauses in 106, does that mean that Taylor Wimpey will make sure that it's maintained over many, many years?
Yes, if I just take you back to the layout. The actual gap in the hedge of footpath link is actually slightly lower down than Uplands Terrace, so it's not directly opposite. Probably best if I show you on the plan. Bear with me a second. Right, you can just see here now. Right, so this is the footpath link. This is the extent of the hedgerow. This is number 1 Uplands Terrace. So directly opposite, some of that hedgerow has been thinned, but they are proposing some replanting in parts of it. So in terms of direct overlooking, that hedgerow will remain for that length. The area that's been left, that will be slightly different because of the smaller bank, but over time the hedgerow will grow, but that's not directly opposite them. And the replanting will strengthen the hedgerow in this location. So, and the proper management of it will also mean that it will grow thicker and stronger and more robust hedgerow. So in the long term, it actually should form a better barrier to the development than it would have if the hedge hadn't been maintained.
You want to come back in, Faye?
I wonder if Taylor Wimpey and Torfaen asked those residents, especially the person number 1, how they feel about this mitigation putting the bank back.
I'm not aware of what Taylor Wimpey have done in terms of contacting the residents, but when the planning application came through, we have consulted the residents of Uplands Terrace, and many of them have provided comments which I've summarised in the report. We've also obviously had, you know, direct dialogue with some of the residents who have been, you know, ringing us over the, you know, since it first started. So we have been aware of their concerns, and that's been, you know, largely part of why we've got to where we are in terms of the mitigation strategy.
Do you want to come back?
Just to say that, when is this work planned for?
Obviously, it's largely dependent on the planting season. We're outside the planting season now, so anything that was planted now would be highly likely to take and would therefore fail. There are mechanisms in the strategy that if anything does fail, they do have to replace it. But the best and most appropriate way of doing it is actually wait until the next planting season now, which won't be till September this year. So that's when they'll start it. But obviously there won't be an immediate change because the planting will have to take time to establish and to grow. But there is a clause in there that should anything die, if they plant when they plant it, they do have to replace it.
Do you want to come back? Yeah.
And I just wondered why they couldn't put quite mature plants in there. It has to be very young plants, does it?
I think putting mature trees, if that's what you're referring to, within the hedgerow would cause a fair bit of disruption, I think. I think the best option is the option which is in front of us, which is bulking up with whip planting. It will take a while to establish, as Helen said, but I think that in terms of filling the gaps in that hedge, and the gaps are quite significant, I think we've got the best plan that we can get really to maintain and sort of enhance that hedgerow.
Thank you.
Are you okay now, Faye? Right, thank you. Ron, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I see we've got a lovely apology letter from Taylor Wimpey. And over the years, I've seen lots of these. And over the years to come, we get a lot more apologies for things they should not be doing, which they do. I think what we should be doing as well now is putting penalties on developers if they don't keep within the 106. Because over the years, I mean, we've got new members here today on planning, and over the years, we've heard all the promises of developers. I'm going to assure the new members here, once this developer has gone from there, they'll promise you the earth, but you won't be getting a lot out of them. I mean, I've got my area where there are trees supposed to be maintained over the years, because they've all grown now, and once they've gone, I mean, they won't want to be managing that. It's the same throughout any development. They're there, settle for a couple of years, and developers, is bye-bye to that. So I'm a bit sceptical here about the maintenance plan on that. Who actually owns that hedgerow then now? So will own it?
There are some of the plots have already been sold further down, and they have been sold. Their conveyancing has gone up to the legal boundary of the site, and that is sort of halfway between usually halfway in the hedge. Then the other half is sort of outside the application site. In terms of long-term management, there's actually going to be a management company on this site set up to look after the ecology interests of the site, the landscaping, the play areas. They will take on the requirements of the ecology management plan long-term. The residents have to pay that management company. So once Taylor Wimpey leave the site, you will still have that management company responsible. They will be managing the hedgerow from St Giles Road side, and the ecologist advised that can be done satisfactorily just from the one side. Going forward on the plots that haven't been sold, they're actually setting back the legal boundaries so that the hedgerow doesn't fall within any of the ownership of those residential properties. So the management plan will have sole responsibility of maintaining the hedgerow.
So it's nothing to do with Torvine, the hedgerow. That's all I know. Because over the years, I mean, I take lots of sites that nobody lays claim to, and nobody wants to maintain them of any description. That's my experience of developers pulling out, and after a few years, they promise you the earth. I mean, I've seen it. I've been on committee for 14 years now, and I've seen them all, and once they've gone, they've gone. But as you say, the residents there are paying into a management plan. That's good, because they are paying for it. So those residents won't come up in a couple of years' time and to Torvine and say, trim that hedge. We say, well, no, go back to your management team, whoever they are. That's fine. But I want to agree with Steve as well about the whips. I mean, Steve and I work quite close together on different things, and that is the best thing to put in there, because once they're in, and they will establish in 2 or 3 years, they will be gone at 5 or 6 foot or more, Thank you.
Right, I've got Jason next.
Thank you, Chair. My initial objections to this project, and it is an interesting one, was the management of the local community surrounding the installation, the removal of the hedge and everything that we're all aware of. This letter, from my point of view, and perhaps I'm being naive, I'm quite optimistic about it. I was quite appreciative to get the letter from the developer, and I think it goes some way to addressing some of the concerns that residents have. And I was particularly pleased to see that they're going to establish a steering board from which to manage the next phase and hopefully conclude this phase. I would want to make sure that local residents are included on that steering board to make sure that their views are heard. I do appreciate there is an apology from Taylor Wimpey, understanding frustrations in the way that Phase 1 was conducted and the fact that it should have been handled more sensitively and considerately, so that I think will go some way towards satisfaction of residents' concerns. And I think what I would like to know is if by removal of that hedge, was there, I'm not a property valuer, but was there a financial implication to the people in Uplands Terrace?
in terms of their property prices, and would they have any kind of recourse against the developer for the illegal removal of that hedgerow if there was?
I don't think we really know the answer to that. That would be up to the residents, I think, to look into that themselves. I would think not, but I don't honestly know.
Thank you for that. Have you finished, Jason? Right. The next one on the list is Stuart.
I've got a couple of observations. Sorry, no, doesn't matter. I've got a couple of observations. One is 30 years ago I moved into a new close, similar idea, and at the end of it we had a mature hedge which belonged to the church, funny enough, no man's land, and there's nothing with a fence, and round my house somebody put 40 Leilandi, and there's nothing to stop you putting 40 Leilandi around it. The trouble is you get merged, because some of them are big Leilandi and some are little Leilandi. Now what I'm interested with this hedge is, and in fact the hedge we had was a native hedge, very similar to this one. The point is, is there anything on those in this development to stop people doing that? Because if you've got this, we've gone through all this trouble to have this conversation in the planning committee, and someone decides for some reason or another they're going to stick even small Leilandi, which can grow to about 30 foot. That's a favourite tree in Cwmbran, all over the place. And that's one conversational point. Can we even do that? I know there's a fence down the inside of some of this, but nothing to stop you putting the Leilander in there, and the fence falls down, goes rotten, whatever. So we end up with a native hedge with a dirty great Leilander hedge down there. That's number one thing. The other, number two is, well, I'll go back to what Jason's just said. We had that letter from Taylor Wimpey. Now, those of us who were dealing with Taylor Wimpey before, obviously South Sebastopol, we've had meetings on that one down there. It goes on for a couple of years, and then we've not had a meeting for about nearly a year now. So what I would like to see in that arrangement they got there is that it's a very simple thing where anybody writes any constitution, is that you have regular meetings, and all the parties constitutionally put down. Otherwise, it ain't worth the paper it's written on. I'm sorry to say this, and there's some sort of financial thing in there. The 106 money is regularly put in, or otherwise, and those of us involved with community councils and groups, is this thing reads regularly. What a clause does that. Otherwise, it's not worth anything, and it doesn't mean anything, because we're frustrated as hell, those of us that are members of that one over in South Sebastopol, because who caused the meeting and why it's caused? If it's constitutionally written, we can challenge it. If it's not constitution, that you meet so many times a year, and anybody that serves on the committee knows this one, and the reason it needs to have a constitution, whether it's charity or a limited company or something, otherwise it's not worth it. That's my two observations there. Thank you. Those if they would, please.
Thank you, Stuart. Who would like to answer that? Helen?
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of planting the Leilandi, given that the fence line is behind the hedge, the only way that they can plant Leilandi is actually to remove some of the hedgerow to make space for it. The environmental management plan will be secured and tied up in the Section 106 agreement. And whether it's the Taylor Wimpey, the management company, or individual residents, if they do any of those works, they will be in breach of the Section 106 agreement. So we have control that way. In terms of the steering group, this is something that the developer has offered and made a commitment to having it. We can certainly, pass on their messages, your message to them in terms of regular meetings.
The bit about the Leilandi, the thing that worries me is not necessarily the developer. It could be the homeowner, because there's nothing to stop them going along with glyphosate and all. Some of the horrors that you see, I only say this because, again, going on allotments, some of the things you get that happen down there, people do the most strange things. There needs to be some sort of covenant or cover in there to stop it. We've gone to a large scene to talk about this biodiversity. We've got Stephen on this one at the moment. There is a reason why that is there. There needs to be some sort of legal thing to stop this. Otherwise, homeowners do the most peculiar things. And I say that because we're having a go at the developer about this, and they're there for a reason. And I think people get it on them. They want to put a fence in, they want to put a row of trees in. There's a fashion on telly for doing certain things. We don't know what that might be in the future. We've gone to all this bother to even have this conversation on this for good reasons. And that's the thing that worries me. We talked about why we grow small trees, and there's a very good reason why you grow small trees, because they grow up and they mesh in, and you can see that with that. If you put big ones in there, the way I talked about Island, because they're an absolute pain. In the last meeting, we talked about why we do things in town centre. It's a good reason why you grow certain trees there, because they're native and they work in that particular location. You introduce Leylandii or other ornamental trees. A cherry might be one that somebody wants to bang in there for good measure as well. And Cwmbran is absolutely full of cherry trees and other non-native species that work singularly as species, but they certainly do not work in that hedge. Now, and I'm not talking about the developer, I'm saying what people want to put in there. Have a look round Cwmbran, you'll find strange things all over the place. So that's the one thing, and thank you for the other thing. I understand what you say, but I love to see some sort of constitutional thing. I'm very consistent about this because we do other things like this, and constitutions is one of my favourite things. Once you've got a constitution and somebody signs up to that, you can't get out of it.
Thank you. Anything else from Alan?
Just so I'm clear, there's going to be no more removal of any further removal of any hedgerows. Is that correct?
There's going to be a little bit more further up where they haven't sort of got to that part of the development. On this plan here, it's not hedgerow removal, it's removal of certain parts. It's not like the hedgerow removal that took place here. I don't know if you can see on this plan, can you see this sort of individual stems and very small trees to be removed here? It's the red. They are inside the site, but further up the development site, beyond Uplands Terrace. And you can just see it's like individual little areas here. But that, we're of the opinion that these removals won't affect the integrity of the hedge, because they are just little bits. Where the hedgerow hasn't been managed by the police training college in the past, it's sort of expanded into the development site. So it's just, cutting it back from the inside.
Who?
Yes, thank you, Chair. These large trees that are going to be removed, are they covered by TPOs? And if they are, what mitigation is going to take place in terms of new planting?
Who would like to answer that? Helen? Okay, thank you.
They're not covered by TPOs, and they're not significantly large trees. They are sort of individual smaller trees that form part of the hedgerow. They're not covered by TPOs, and this whole strategy is mitigated for not only the existing loss of hedgerow, but some of the other works that are required just to on the inside of the development site. So it's the width planting. It's, for example, if you here you can see here there are these smaller trees to be removed, and then you have the blue is extra width planting, understory planting to strengthen this band here. Because this is some of the photographs I showed you where it was in this location where there are actually quite a few gaps. So in doing that, although you are removing some of the planting, the existing planting here, you're actually reinforcing the hedge as a hedgerow.
Thank you, Helen. Steve, you want to come in? Okay.
With the hedgerow they're taking out on the other parts of the site and the other trees, will we be closely monitoring this? Because this is where we're in a situation from a previous time.
Yeah.
Will somebody be monitoring it to make sure they're only taking out what it's supposed to be?
Yeah, we've had this question quite a lot, and I'd love to be on every site monitoring compliance with the standards, but we just haven't got the staff to be able to do that. But what we are choosing to do through this agreement, the Section 106 that will be signed here, is to make sure that a competent person signs off that they've done it in accordance with the plan. Now, if it's a competent person, not part of the company, it would be an ecologist in its own right, would be signing off saying that I'm happy that the plan that they said they would do has actually been carried out, as opposed to us being on site monitoring.
will that be an agreement with yourselves before they actually take it out, just to make sure in case you want to take something else?
It would be after what they will be doing is once they've done the works of mitigation, they'll be compiling a report and sending it to us with a competent person saying, yep, that's all been done in accordance with the approved details. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Who again?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that the council hasn't got resources to have someone permanently camped there to check it stage by stage, but surely once we've received this report signed off by this competent person, it would only take one site visit by the enforcement officer to go back in to check that the 106 agreements have been adhered to.
Yeah, we would do that on a case-by-case basis. If we felt that there was a need to check it, we would. It may well be, because this has been quite a sensitive site, that we would do that in this particular case. I think my point is there are many, many sites being developed with landscaping schemes and trees being removed, and it wouldn't be possible. I mean, those residents in those areas would be concerned about what's coming out, but we wouldn't have the resources to do all of that as a matter of course. But we do, where there's an issue, certainly where residents point it out, we would go up there and check it, certainly, yes.
Supplementary on that, please, if I may, Chair. I would just say, given the history on this site, it would warrant a site visit by the enforcement officer, just because of the history of what's happened on the previous application and the 106 arrangements not being adhered to. I think, and I agree with one of my colleagues made the comment earlier, that a lot of work has gone into trying to redress what wasn't done correctly previously in terms of the mitigation plan. But I think there does need to be a carrot and a stick as well. And if we are going to get developers who don't make good their actions, then significant enforcement action needs to be taken. And if that means large fines, punitive, to restore things, where the council effectively has to restore things but fine the developers, I would stress on this particular site that there probably is, just because of the history that's gone on this site and the previous application, what's happened, there's a very strong requirement here for the enforcement officer to go back in at the end of the development, just to make sure that everything has been fully complied with.
Do you want to come back in, Richard?
As I've said, I think, yes, this was a sensitive case, so it may well be that in this particular case we would go up there on a few occasions just to make sure that it's happening properly. But I think the point I'm making is it wouldn't be possible to do that on all sites. But I agree with you on this one. I think we should, yes.
Satisfied, Hugh?
Yes.
Yeah. Stuart, do you want to come?
I'm mindful of what you're saying there, Richard, that before something happens, especially if we're ripping things up or cutting things down, a pre and one after, that happens with building works, doesn't it?
We don't normally do a pre and a post site inspection, no. In this particular case, I think what they go in to do has been well set out in the documents. There is enforcement action that we can take, but I think in this particular case we are satisfied that as long as a competent person is monitoring, we would be happy that is enough in terms of enforcement.
The only reason I bring that one up on another site, if somebody had gone there beforehand, certain things wouldn't have happened. So, and in this case, the hedgerow might not have been out as much as it had if somebody had gone there and looked at it. That's the only reason I'm making that observation.
Just to confirm, in this particular case, we were there on the date that the hedgerow was being taken out, and many times after that, yes.
Thank you for that. Janet?
Thanks, Chair. I just share Councillor Bevan and Councillor Burnett's concerns, and I think I speak for the majority of this planning committee that we're still not convinced that the developers are going to do what they say, even though we've had all these amendments. And I do think that as a planning committee, failure to do so should it result in greater penalties on any development, not just Taylor Wood Road, but any further developments within the borough.
We have got a very comprehensive list of conditions. I don't know whether the officers want to comment on it, but...
I think, Madam Chairman, that as members of the committee, we're still not convinced that the officers do what they say, but the developers, we're still not convinced that the developers will keep to their word.
Anybody want to comment on that?
I don't think I can add anything else to that. I think that in this particular case, it's a very robust agreement. It's a legal agreement that the developer himself will sign, and because it's a legal agreement, in my view, that's probably the most robust that we could probably do. We can't stop it all, and I completely accept that, but it is, I think, the best that we can achieve in this particular development.
Thanks, Richard.
Right, thank you for that. Jason wants... go on, Steve.
The first application, that was a legal document as well, so what difference does that make on the second time?
I think it was. We haven't always done this particular agreement. We've talked to the developer about how we make sure that there's a monitoring and compliance. And I think that given the lessons we've learned through this, this is the sort of prototype that we'll be looking to use going forward. So that competent person signing off and monitoring the development is probably the way that we'll be looking to go in the future.
Thank you. Jason?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I'm personally content with the conditions that have been applied to this, and I think as a committee we have to establish a certain degree of trust with the developers that they'll tell us what they'll do and they'll do what they say. Now, in this case it does have some history, but on the balance of probability I think they've probably learnt the lesson and the fact that they can't do this on the second phase. So I would therefore like to motion that we pass the officer's recommendations and accept the recommendation.
Right, is there a second? It's been seconded. Right. Who wants to comment first? Then you can.
I'd just like to thank Richard for his comments that if we've not achieved anything, we've achieved by getting the officer to produce a more robust proposal for developers, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, Richard, do you want to come in?
My comment was going to be very similar to my colleague there, that I'm pleased that what has come out of this development is now a precedent to take forward better controls of developments in the future.
Right, thank you for your comments. Faye, you want to comment?
I'd just like to say that seeing those red circles down on that second part down there, I can't feel any confidence, despite the fact that we're putting this legal sort of things around things to strengthen things up. I'm still very worried, being the St Giles councillor, about those red dots.
Right. Can anybody reassure you? Do you want the officers or...
Steve can come in.
Oh, Steve will come in on this. Thank you, Steve.
I think in general trees, the red areas you're talking about, I think they're mainly self-seeded trees, which will have self-seeded due to lack of management on the Taylor Wimpey side before the development commenced. What we're looking at is to remove some of the self-seeded and then to replant, if you like, with whips, the whole of the hedgerow in that area. So we're actually just moving self-seeded trees, if you like, away from where they are to plug the gaps in the hedgerow. So they are largely self-seeded trees from my understanding. And like I said previously, I think what we've got in front of us is a comprehensive view and plan for that whole hedgerow.
Thank you, Steve.
I'd just like to say that there are residents who live the other side of the Taylor Wimpey development who want to see a nice thick hedge maintained and kept between Taylor Wimpey and themselves, and they've enjoyed a bit of privacy and lots of wildlife and a little bit of nature, and I'm very worried that it'll get thinned on the other edge.
Anybody want to come back in on that?
Just to reiterate really that I think we've got a robust plan for that hedgerow which gives that hedgerow the best opportunity of being a a decent ecological feature in the future, and a decent barrier between the new development and St Giles Road.
Right, Stuart, you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear the council's ecologists sitting there and saying this, because I still have some reservations, but I'm going to support this. The ecological aspect of this is worrying, because we've got developers coming in, and we've got not too many aspects, as Steve will say this, around. We've got a sill on this site as well. It's a very special landscape, and we've got an ancient hedge line. People, I think from a developer's point of view, this should be an asset, not something they see as a problem. And I have to say that because, people should want that there as part of the development, the same in other parts of the borough, because this is an asset. It's a wonderful thing to have bee living there. And the same with the grasslands. They're assets that should be, not managed, but there, that people should enjoy. And it's important that they realise what they're there for and why they're there, because we've got declining bee populations and declining insect populations. And I'm Steve's much more expert on this than I am, but they're there because that's what they're very, very special environments, and we should cherish them. So I hope they treat this realistically. I'm listening to what the officers say, and I'm confident in what they're saying there, because normally they're right on these things.
Thank you for that, Stuart. Yes, we're all with you there. I'm sure we are. Right, you want to come in?
Just one quick point, please, Chair, if I may be permitted. The planning officer mentioned earlier that some of the properties have already been sold, and the legal boundary is halfway through the hedgerow. Why was it determined that the boundary should have been halfway through the hedge? Why wasn't the boundary set at a point which did not include the hedge? Because the point that Councillor Ashley made earlier is, once the developer's finished with the site and the residents move in, if the resident is minded to remove half the hedgerow, it does away with a lot of the mitigations we've got for thickening the hedgerow. So that's the concern I've got, is why was the boundary set at where it was halfway through that hedge and not inside the margin of the hedgerow?
Right. Helen, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. Basically they've sold the plots up to their legal boundary. So as you can see here, this is actually thinner than the area that they're proposing to replant and enhance. These plots have been sold, and this is why from those photographs you could see that the hedge line was set back. So the fence line was set back, and then that's going to enable them to put that bank back up. That's the legal boundary of the plots that have been sold. They're all in place now, and any hedgerow replanting is all going to happen the other side of the hedge, past beyond the legal boundary of the plots that have been sold. Further on here, these plots haven't been sold yet, so as you can see, what they've done is, learning from the past experiences, they've actually set the fence lines back further back to enable them to enhance the hedgerow and keep it outside the legal boundaries. So that then, going forward, will be the responsibility of the management company to maintain the hedge. So yes, it is. The hedgerow is thinner from this plot all the way down there, but as you can see from the photographs, it's still a substantial hedgerow. And then it's from here onwards. This is where they're going to significantly enhance it to improve the depth and fill the gaps as well.
Thank you, Helen. Right. Are you all ready to vote? We've had a motion, a proposal is seconded, and you've all read the conditions as the officers report, and that's what we're voting on now. So those for? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 12 votes. Thank you. Those against? 1 against. Against? Any abstentions? No. That planning application has been approved. Thank you. Right, we move on to item agenda 6, and it's application number 17/P/05448, and it's the proposal is for erection of 108 residential units, open space, landscaping, access and associated infrastructure, and the site is the Police Training College, Green Meadow Way, Cwmbran. There was a site inspection on the 4th of April for this application, and it was deferred from the last meeting, if you remember, and Helen is going to take us through this with a presentation. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Chair just mentioned, as you remember, it was deferred from last planning committee as members were concerned about the insurances the developers would actually carry out the mitigation measures in the environmental management plan. So just to refresh members, this relates to phase 2 of the Police Training College. And obviously there are different ecological issues on this site. And the application also includes the ecology management plan, setting mitigation measures for the grasslands and hedgerows. So I'll just refresh members. Here we have an aerial photograph. This is phase 1, which we've just been discussing, and here we have phase 2. Again, it forms the second phase of the allocated site within the LDP. The site is made up of 5 fields. Field 1 is actually part of the phase 1 proposal, where the recreation facilities will be located. We have field 2 here, 3, 4, 5 and 6. These are all designated as a sink due to the important grasslands. The proposal involves the development of field 3 and the park development of field 2. Fields 4, 5 and 6 will be retained and managed to increase their value for grasslands. Here we have some photographs of field 2. This is the part of the site which will be largely developed. Field 2. Here we have field 3. Again, you can see, again, similar to phase 1, because the site hasn't been managed correctly, there's a lot of invasive species of Himalayan balsam, which detracts from the quality of the grassland. The ecology management plan sets out a regime for management and clearance of the invasive species to allow the grasslands to flourish. And here we have field 4 and field 5. So here we have the layout. Access is gained through phase 1, through the main spine road at the site. Here we have field 4 and 5. Originally, the proposal included attenuation tanks to be located in the bottom of this field, but this would have required a significant chunk of mature trees being removed and a culvert, because there's a watercourse running through here. Through negotiations with the developer, they've agreed to, they redesigned it so that the attenuation tanks could be located in this location, thus enabling the retention of the hedgerow and no need for a culvert. This keeps the ecological connectivity. There was originally proposed, as part of the allocation for the LDP, for a loop road to go around phase 3 and back into phase 2. This is no longer proposed, as we felt that that would further segregate the grasslands from the watercourses and the tree belt to the south. Here we have St Giles Road, and we have a small section of the hedgerow as part of this application site. And again, lessons learned from the issues of phase 1. The boundaries have been set back in to allow the retention of the hedgerow. At last committee, there's quite a few questions on loss of trees, so I've added another slide here just to show members the extent of the trees to be removed. You can see them in red here. So the majority are in this location here to allow the access. You have a significant belt of trees along here, and it's only a very small number of trees on the inside, again self-seeded trees, to be removed to allow the development. There is an area of hedgerow being removed here, but the ecology survey suggests that it's full of invasive species, so it would be very difficult to remove the invasive species without affecting the hedgerow. So as a result, the applicant proposes a new replacement hedge along here, again, native species. Here we have some street scenes, and again, it's a similar development to phase 1. And as part of this proposal, the applicants are enhancing the recreation area, which will serve phase 1 and phase 2 by increasing the size of the play area, but also providing a multi-use games area. The pitch and some of the other facilities were secured as part of phase 1. So the main issues with this proposal, obviously it's allocated site in the LDP. The Highways Office is satisfied from a highway and parking layout. Negotiations taking place to improve the design and layout, not only from a good design practice, but also to improve the ecological features of the site. We have, obviously, ecology is a major issue. We have ecological management plan which sets out, again, a comprehensive strategy for managing the retained grasslands. It's accepted that there will be loss of quantity of grasslands, but this will be offset by an improvement in the quality of the grasslands, which are to be retained by securing the adequate management of the retained areas. Again, now going back to the reason why it was deferred, members were concerned about how we could ensure that this mitigation strategy is actually secured and make sure it's actually implemented correctly. So as part of the similar kind of thing that we've done on phase 1, we will be inserting an additional clause, again for the Clerk of Works and the monitoring reports to be submitted to us for approval. And in addition to that, you have obviously the standard 30% affordable housing, future access to phase 3 is to be retained, and again the provision of the recreation provision. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Are there any questions or comments? Faye?
Can I just say again, I'm very worried about the hedge between the existing homes that are there and the new ones that are going to be built. And although I approve of building new houses, it's the thickness of the hedge that is worrying me again. And, you know, Taylor Wimpey have sort of proven that they put profits before ecology, and I'm just worried that that's going to carry on despite the letter.
Helen, please.
Thank you. Is it this hedgerow you're referring to, is it? Yeah. I don't know if you can just see here the red line here. That's actually the application site. So this belt of trees here is actually within council ownership, the majority of it. So the developers have no rights to that area there. And then in addition to this, you can see this belt of trees to be retained all along here and all along here. So it is literally, there's 1, 2, 3, and there's one up there, 4 trees. But they are the smaller self-seeded, because along the edge of the woodland, it is a bit more scrappy trees rather than the mature trees that form that hedgerow.
Thank you.
Can we say absolutely that it won't make any difference to the view and to the thickness of the hedge for the people who already live in those cul-de-sacs around the side?
Obviously, during the summertime, when the trees are in full leaf, I've stood there in the summer and I can't see into the site at all. You will maybe have, obviously, in the trees when there's less leaves on there, you may be able to see glimpses through the trees in the distance. But the proposed works, in terms of any small tree removal, that wouldn't substantially harm that. And so visually, I would say that that view from existing from Salisbury Crescent wouldn't change.
Okay, thank you.
Right, I've got Hugh next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, really, please. One of the very funny comments is about the invasive species. Whose responsibility was it to remove the invasive species? Was it the police in the past, or was it a Torvine responsibility. And the second question, really, looking at this, it seems to me that the developer, the applicant in this case, has taken on board comments from Torfaen planning officers, and especially ecologically, and there does seem to be more sensitivity, I think, in this particular application with regard for the site and mitigation that they're undertaking with regards to recreation and the replanting of a new hedgerow, where the first one is going to be removed. But the question I wanted to ask was, does it go far enough in terms of, it's deemed, the officer saying that it's adequate mitigation, but when you read the concerns of Gwent Wildlife Trust, they were recommending that the developer should, under a 106 agreement, give provision of 2 further fields. And I wondered if I could have some more commentary around that, please.
Right. Is Steve coming in for the first question?
First question, I think, was about invasive species, wasn't it? The law on the invasive species is that you are, under the Wildlife Countryside Act Section 9, is you should not allow them to grow in the wild. So, in this case, it was Himalayan balsam, which I believe is the main invasive species on site, although I think there's some Japanese knotweed as well. It would have been the responsibility of the landowner to deal with or to prevent any invasive species spreading into the wild, and that's how the legislation is written. So it's the landowner's responsibility.
So then, just for the sake of clarity, the landowner was the Gwent Police.
Is he right?
The previous landowner was Ministry of Justice. Whether the Himalayan balsam was on site at that time is a debatable issue, because the site has been left for quite a long time, because these species just move around, and it could have come in naturally, but it could have been there when the Ministry of Justice had the land.
So, when did the ownership of the land change? This is what I'm trying to get at. And I'm trying to get at, was if the land came into Torfaen's ownership, did Torfaen have a duty of care under the statutes to go in and remove those invasive species? Have we failed in removing those species, basically?
Helen will come in with
It's not Torfaen's land. We've never owned it. Taylor Wimpey had purchased it from directly from the Ministry of Justice.
Okay, now here.
Thank you. So basically, it's Taylor Wimpey's responsibility as the landowner to remove them. Yeah. Thank you. Wanted to be clear on that.
Right. Okay. Stuart?
Yeah, similar vein. I read through this again a couple of times. The sink sites, which...
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get my second question answered.
Oh, God.
Sorry, Stuart, can you hang on just a minute? Yeah, I forgot about your second one.
Okay, did the officers forget it as well? Or do you want to? Can you remember what the second question was? Yeah,
we've got it.
They got it. It's okay. They'll answer you now.
The
Sorry
second
about
question
that.
was in relation to the Wildlife Trust comments in terms of offsetting. I think I took the view that I would prefer to have the remaining areas of grassland which are set outside of the built development. I would prefer to have those a management plan in place and that robustly enforced to make certain that the remaining grassland on site could be as good as we could achieve. So that's the view I took. The site at the moment, the grassland site at the moment, is in very, very poor condition. Similar to the hedgerow, lack of management over time. Its value as a grassland habitat is diminishing, partly because it hasn't been managed invasive species. And I took the view that The areas left outside of the footprint of the development are best focused on in terms of enhancing for the biodiversity value.
As a supplementary chair, I think what is of concern here really, and this goes against the LDP really. I mean, you're saying that there's been a deterioration of the biodiversity within this particular site, but it's still designated as a sink site. And the overriding thing really should be whether Torfaen should be including sink sites in the LDP as part of sites that have been given the go-ahead for development. That is the concern, because as the report itself states, the extent of this grassland throughout England and Wales has been significant. More than 90% of it has already been lost. And I think that is why Gwent Wildlife Trust wanted further mitigation in restoration of the provision of additional grassland somewhere else, so that there wasn't any further deterioration in that number. Whilst I accept that this particular application, the developer has been a bit more ecologically sensitive, the question was, are they going far enough in terms of what is deemed to be an appropriate level of mitigation?
Who wants to answer that?
Can I just say that the site has been allocated, as you said. We can't revisit that allocation. It's part of the legal framework for determining planning applications. The inspector did recognise the balance that would have to be struck between the grassland and development. We've had to strike that balance, and to answer your question, I believe in consultation with Steve, we have struck that balance, yet I'm satisfied with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think going forwards we need to, as a council as a whole, is bear in mind the importance of sink sites when agreeing the LDP. I know that there's a land bank shortage in Torfaen of available land for usage, and I've been an advocate in the past, as a number of my colleagues have here, of trying to promote greater usage of brownfield sites, but it is a concern that there is a loss of these sink sites within the borough.
Yeah, Richard will come in with that.
Just to let you know, as you know, we are embarking on a new LDP, and those are the sorts of debates and conversations that we're going to have going forward in the new LDP, certainly.
I've got Stuart next on.
I shall have a go now, shall I? Because following on from what Hugh's just said, had I been around when that was decided, that would have been something that would have been flagged up, because I've already had that conversation. That allocation was made hell of a long time ago, wasn't it, Richard? And way out of our time. So that, Hugh, thank you for that. The other thing was, I take Steve's point totally, and what I need to get my head around last planning meeting, thank you Helen for this by the way, because when I looked it up, was this land is like a hay meadow in a lot of ways. If you don't manage it, it doesn't produce. If you leave it fallow, it's the opposite of most ecology, where if you leave it, it does something. This one's the opposite way around, very similar to hay meadow. You do it, you get the ecology on it. So I understand what you mean by this now, because I looked stuff up on it. So we understand. So we want to get as much on this management of this as possible. So I understand where you're going with this. So I support it in that principle. And as much as it's the opposite of what we said in the previous conversation. If we get 106 for this and a management plan, I think that's probably where we go. It does have implications. I'm sorry to say this for other bits of land around it. In my other role, we'll have to look at that one. The other thing that I did notice here was archaeology, because this site is because it was in ownership that nobody's been able to have a look at since the Ministry of Justice was on there. There's probably a huge amount of archaeology we don't know about, and the archaeological people say so. It desperately needs that archaeology to look over it. I mean, and we haven't had a chance to look in there. So people that used to have on community council were very keen on this. We'd love to have a look in there. So I appreciate that we've lost it. It would be useful just to do that emergency archaeology. Who's the archaeology expert in your department? I don't think we've got one, have we? Before I go, the other one is the whole business about drainage, because I did have a conversation on that one as well. It's not just the holding tanks. There's obviously a stream that runs off down to my other favourite topic of conversation, which is the canal, because there's obviously that leads down, and that's the other one we didn't have a look at, because obviously the drainage down into the streams that go down into Avonlwyd and all that, there's implications. You've talked about holding tanks, you talked about the streams, some of it goes in the canal, some of it goes in Avonlwyd underneath the town centre, so that whole implications of that, and I think, I don't want to hold this up, but I think it's something that is an ongoing work, isn't it? So can you answer on that a lot, if you would, please?
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. In terms of the archaeology, we don't have any in-house expertise, but we consult the Morgan Gwent Archaeological Trust.
Yeah.
They're a statutory consultee in areas where there's an archaeological interest. On page 75 of the report, you'll see their response, and they've recommended just further works to be done in terms of archaeological assessment of the site before the developments commence. So if you see on page 106, there's condition number 22. There's a condition requiring them to get a written scheme of historic investigation put in place, which they need to submit to us for approval. We'll consult with the Morgan Gwent Archaeological Trust, and if they're happy with it, that condition will be discharged. The developers then will then have to carry the development out in accordance with that scheme. Now, it could be just a matter of just a desktop study, or it could be more invasive, trial pits, or it could be having an archaeologist on site when digging. That will come out of that report that they need to submit. In terms of the drainage, there's a drainage strategy for the site. Obviously, the attenuation is in this location here, so the surface water runoff. That will be discharged at Greenfield runoff rate into the brook, and our drainage officer is satisfied with the drainage strategy on this site. Thank you.
Yes.
The other aspect was the 106 management. I will come back to the archaeology, because anybody that looks at Cwmbran, big bold depression that it is, and you come in over Carlion Road, you look at the site and you think, there's something missing here historically, because I looking at the site and think, even with my limited knowledge of archaeology, there must have been a lot more here, because I keep listening to certain ex-community councillor who's passionate about it, and you've got Llantarnam Abbey, but there seems to be a lot of stuff, and this site, to my mind, and looking at what they've written on there, that does look a possibility, so I welcome the fact that there's something in there to do that. And as far as going back to biodiversity, if we get a plan in similar to the one you're talking about, hedge management, that would satisfy me. But I think we need to remember the conversation we had before about a firm set-up to doing this. Otherwise, it ain't worth the paper it's written on.
Yes, Helen, please.
Just want to reiterate that we've actually got a management plan set up already. It came in with a planning application and has been subject to a lot of consultation with Steve throughout the process. So we're at a stage where we have a comprehensive document setting out the management principles and proposals for the site. So that's already set to go into the Section 106 agreement for them to implement. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Hugh again.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Well, if this application is approved now, would this represent the full allocation of the housing on that site versus the LDP?
Helen will answer that.
No, there's still phase 3 to go, but it's a lot smaller. Phase 3 is a lot smaller. If I just take you back to the aerial photograph. Phase 3, Taylor Wimpey aren't in control of phase 3. It's difficult. It's actually these fields. So there's the outline of phase 2. So it's these fields down here on the eastern part of the site. That forms phase 3. That will be subject to, again, a separate planning application, where, again, we have to go through the same process of ecology, surveys, and then working out the most appropriate developmental areas. That hasn't come forward yet, but if it does come forward in the future, then we'll be having the same it'll be the same considerations at that time that we're dealing with this phase.
Okay. Steve?
On phase 3, are they restricted by the number of, by the amount of houses they can build on it due to the 108 built on phase 2?
They are, well, potentially restricted. It is allocated for 350 dwellings, which doesn't, when you think of phase 1 and phase 2 combined, it doesn't leave that many to provide on phase 2. But the allocation, even though it's at 350, it doesn't, set that in stone. If it can be demonstrated that it can be developed comprehensive, adequately, it can be allowed slightly, more than the 350. So we don't know, again, until ecology surveys are done, and then we don't know which developed areas are appropriate for development. That will then decide which development areas and how many dwellings they can get in that location. But the transport assessment that was submitted for phase 1 and phase 2 did a sensitivity test for additional dwellings above the 350 to make sure that in the event that extra houses were put on phase 3, which struck it above the 350, that the highway network was suitable for that amount of development. But again, until a planning application comes forward, we have to, consider that at that time. At that time, it might be that they come in with, more houses that take it over the 350 might be acceptable, but it might not be in terms of the ecology of the site. And so that's something we can't assess at this stage, but potentially it could result in more than 350 on the overall site.
Thank you, Helen. Any other questions, comments? Anyone ready? Yeah. Anybody want to put a proposal?
I'll propose the officer's recommendation.
Right, I've had a proposal and a seconder, and that's the officer's report, as the officer's report and conditions. Right. We're ready to vote for this application? Yeah, please. 4, yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 12, 4. Against? 1 against. And no abstentions. I think that's everybody voted. This application has been approved. Thank you all for your attendance. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much for attending.